Hello ladies and gentlemen. Before the video starts, I'd like to raise awareness on a friend's GoFundMe. Her family restaurant has been going through some hard times and I thought I could help them by raising awareness for it on my own channel. A link to it will be provided in the description. Please donate any amount of money you want or spread awareness for it however you can. I'm not asking for much, just to give a moment of your time to help them out. Any form of help would be deeply appreciated. Thank you. In my previous video I went into detail on how Sonic Adventure 2 delivered the golden standard on how to characterize Shadow the Hedgehog, exploring the story's portrayal of him as an introvert recovering from the loss of Maria. Contrary to the popular belief, the game never made him act edgy or obsessed with revenge. Rather, he was motivated by his friendship with Maria and wanted to fulfill her wish. It was an incredible storyline explaining how Shadow wanting to destroy the Earth was part of a misunderstanding, and that his character was far more nuanced than just acting vengeful and brooding. Of course, this was in anticipation of the third live-action movie, as none other than Shadow was introduced into the universe of the films. The film's make-or-break element was definitely going to be how it would adapt the story of the game and how it would characterize Shadow throughout the movie. And now that it's finally here, it's time to ask the most important question. Did Sonic the Hedgehog 3 get Shadow right? Well, they did, but in some ways they also didn't. And I don't mean that with any sign of disapproval, as that would imply the movie is bad, because it's not. It's still a good movie, even as good as the second one in terms of tone and pacing. The story establishes Shadow's character very early on, showing how he was affected by Maria's death and the destructive power he's capable of. They show how he feels lost after being placed in stasis for 50 years, waking up to a new and unfamiliar world. And it doesn't get in the way of how the other characters fit into the plot. The opening does a very good job demonstrating how Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have adapted to life on Earth, bonding as a family with Tom and Maddie. They also take time to reflect on Sonic's first years living alone, showing how much growth and development he's been through since the first film. It's a nice parallel through both visuals and dialogue, showing how Sonic used to be alone, but now he has friends and family to spend time with. There's also a lot of really fun banter between him and Knuckles now that their relationship is that of friendly rivals than enemies. There's so many fun lines of dialogue from Knuckles with his literal and simple-minded view on things bouncing off of Sonic's more grounded and snarky attitude. And they do it without reverting him to acting like an idiot. Each of the main characters serve a practical purpose in the plot, so none of the cast feel phoned in or brought back out of obligation. There's even a scene with Tom and Maddie tinkering with Tails' technology that works really well in bringing back Rachel and her husband without actually including them in the plot. The film makes very good use out of its somewhat small cast, introducing a few new characters without dragging out the story. There's even a new phase in Sonic's development as a character, where he has to learn to stay in control of his emotions and not let anger consume him, which makes for a reasonable turnabout for how he resolves his conflict with Shadow. The action sequences are also much better than in the previous two movies, but part of it could be because of how more scarce they are. The first and second movie had a bunch of action sequences. This movie has about 3 or 4, which is actually a good thing. It gives the script time to breathe and actually focus on the characters and their relationships, not letting the fight sequences get in the way until they're necessary for the story. It makes them more refreshing when the characters do start fighting, because we get more character moments to ease tension in between heavier scenes, thus adding more stakes to them. They also do a really good job in establishing the threat of Shadow. You always take him seriously as an opposing force, and it really feels like nothing can stop him. There's a better sense of balance in how the characters are handled compared to the first two films, highlighting their unique personalities and giving them proper screen time. Of course, we all know that the best part of these movies is always going to be Jim Carrey and his wackiness. It continues the trend of letting the actor go all out with his cartoon antics a la Ace Ventura, while establishing him as a threatening villain, both as Ivo and Gerald Robotnik. These two characters are easily the most consistently entertaining thing in the movie. So many great scenes that just allow Jim Carrey to work off of himself. The way these two characters constantly bounce off each other is a goldmine of physical comedy and creatively funny dialogue. But they're also allowed to come off as unique characters with their own identity. Gerald is faithfully portrayed as a man who lost his sanity and became obsessed with revenge, while Eggman goes through some pretty unexpected character development in the third act. There's a very good theme with his character wanting to fill that empty void in his life with family or something he can relate to, rather than just having a sidekick to assist in his plans like Agent Stone. And at the end of the film, he goes through a well-deserved redemption arc while letting him get closure with Agent Stone. And it also makes for a pretty clever way to close the curtain on Jim Carrey's career. This was pretty much his swan song as a Hollywood actor, and I really hope it stays that way, as it would be a satisfying conclusion to his work. But there's also a number of things holding the film back, more than a few gaps in the story that muddy the narrative. The weakest element to the movie is easily the comedy. Several of the jokes just drag on too long and are too on the nose with how Jim Carrey breaks the fourth wall. It offsets a movie that's trying to have a more serious tone compared to its predecessors, and it really falls into MCU territory with that worn-out formula following a serious scene with a shoehorn joke. In the climax, they transition between the fight with Sonic and Shadow by cutting back to this awkward bit between Eggman and Gerald, and it's really off-putting. There's also several plot points that are terribly placed in the film, and some of them aren't even given any satisfying conclusion. Like, what was the point of the subplot where Team Sonic is framed for Walter's death if they never expand on it? That lady never appears in the movie again after giving the keycard to Tom, so is she still trying to have them arrested or what? Why doesn't she question how Walter survived the explosion or how he arrived at the facility without her being notified? Why does the guard allow Tom and Maddie in just because she was threatening to have him fired? I'm pretty sure he outranks Rachel and she has no authority over him whatsoever. Why did they bother with that plot point that they can't let Sonic go super because of the danger of using the Master Emerald's power if they just let him get a hold of it so easily? Like, Knuckles tries to talk him out of it, but then he just decides to trust him for no reason. And then that guy who took up most of the Knuckles show is shown to be its guardian and Sonic takes it from him with no effort. Did the actor just really want to cameo in the film that badly? Was he really that important to the story that he had to appear just for that one joke? How does Gerald survive the explosion but not Maria? I think he was arguably closer to the explosion, but he ends up surviving while she dies for the sake of the plot. How did Eggman survive his death in the second film? Was he just found by Stone and he helped him stay in hiding? And what was the point of Tom being fatally injured and making the audience think he's gonna die if they were just gonna fake it out at the end? It just felt like an excuse to make Sonic go super if Tom ends up surviving anyway. Honestly, this movie would have been much more powerful if Tom ended up dying. It would have resulted in real lasting consequences for Shadow's actions while hitting the message to Sonic a lot better, about not letting anger consume you and not acting on impulses before making a choice. I think there's plenty of ways these problems could have easily been avoided, at least to make the plot less disjointed. So, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the real meat of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Shadow. Now, for the most part, the filmmakers do have a good understanding of the character and his background. That one line of dialogue where he chastises Team Sonic for jumping out of a gun helicopter is filled with a lot of raw anger, showing how much resentment he has towards the government. They also gave him a really good flashback sequence where he remembers his friendship with Maria and progressively learns about emotions and opening himself up to another person. There's even a moment in the flashback where he's seen smiling, showing how he was genuinely happy with his life in the facility. They include the scene from the game where he questions his existence and if he'll be able to find any practical purpose living on Earth. Seeing him return to the ruins of his old home while reflecting on his old life is surprisingly striking. They let the mood settle in so you can feel the grief and loneliness he's experiencing. And most importantly, they show how his desire for revenge is something programmed into him by Gerald instead of something he came up with on his own. It's really sick how instead of modifying his mind to be obedient, he instead manipulates his emotions to get a mental hold on him. That's a really clever spin on how it was done in the original game. It shows how Gerald is the true villain of the movie and Shadow is just an unsuspecting instrument to complete his plan, much like how it happened in the original game. Honestly, I'm surprised they were able to stay as faithful to the source material as they did, since they couldn't include characters like Rouge and Amy without overcrowding the cast, and his turnaround during the climax is done in a believable way. He learns from Sonic that acting in anger doesn't solve anything and how Maria would want him to live on with the love they shared for each other. The story also takes a pretty interesting direction by drawing parallels between how Sonic and Shadow process the grief of losing a loved one. Sonic had a support group to help him through the loss of Longclaw, and thus is able to process it a lot better, while Shadow, who has no one, is consumed by thoughts of revenge. It makes the two of them working together to stop the Eclipse Cannon a very satisfying and exhilarating climax. And yes, they got Live and Learn to play in the background during the final battle. That alone ranks in a lot of points for the movie. In general, Shadow's character is handled fairly well, and I look forward to seeing what they do with him in future movies. But unfortunately, there was also a lot of ways in which the movie got the character wrong, and it also leaves out a lot of important details from the game, making his origin less impactful. The first major problem is how Maria's role in the story is extremely downplayed. They didn't even mention her failing health, which was a crucial factor in the story, and why Shadow was even created in the first place. She's kind of just there to be Shadow's friend to instigate the conflict later. Even the montage of her spending time with Shadow doesn't do anything to flesh out her character. She's just a bubbly girl doing silly things with Shadow. It weakens the impact of her death because they don't really explore her relationship with Shadow, and that's probably because of all the changes they made to the backstory. In the original, he was artificially created from alien DNA as part of Gerald's search for a cure for Maria's condition. In the movie, he's already alive and just crash-landed on Earth in a meteorite. They barely do anything to explain what Project Shadow was, making it less complex than it was in the game. There's also a lot of stupid things they put in the movie just for the sake of making him look cool and brooding when it just makes him look edgy. Why is Shadow driving a motorcycle? He doesn't need one. And why are they making him wield a gun? Don't they know that was the thing that started the downward spiral of quality Sonic games? But the biggest problem with the movie's portrayal of Shadow is how he lacks the compassion he had in the game. Sonic Adventure 2 took its time to establish many aspects of Shadow's personality through his interactions with Rouge, Amy, and Sonic. Things like him having a sense of humility by admitting there was more to Sonic than he believed, or having sympathy for others when he risked his life to rescue Rouge. These were elements of his character that were explored throughout the story. It wasn't something they held off on until his redemption at the end, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3 makes this mistake. I get that they couldn't do things exactly because of the movies having their own separate continuity from the games while not including other characters, but by leaving these things out and focusing on his revenge, they leave out more fundamental elements of his character. Every scene with Shadow after he meets Gerald just focuses on him wanting revenge for Maria's death, leaving little room for other aspects of his personality. They don't show his compassionate side or his ability to admit when someone is on his level, or give him a scene where he just has a casual talk with someone. There's even a scene where him and Agent Stone are flushed in the sewers after Tails finds their hiding spot, and Shadow just left him for dead to get the second key card. The next time we see Stone, he struggles to pull himself out of a river, which heavily implies that Shadow just left him to drown. Remember when Sonic Adventure 2 showed how even when pursuing revenge, Shadow still took a detour from his mission to save Rouge? Well, that doesn't happen here. He just leaves Stone to drown to pursue his revenge. That is a very bad read of his character. The movie makes him too single-minded and obsessed with revenge, which in turn makes him feel edgy. You know, the thing everyone gets wrong about his character. Shadow wasn't edgy. He never was. He was an introvert recovering from trauma who learned to emotionally open himself up to other people. The movie doesn't really grasp that side of his character, focusing more on making him look cool and intimidating. I still love that scene where he dismisses Rouge trying to discourage him by telling him he may be a fake, because whether or not he's real doesn't matter as long as he still has his memories of Maria. Or that scene where he struggles to suppress his emotions to avoid reliving Maria's death while rescuing Rouge. Nothing like that happens in the movie, and by leaving out those elements of his character, it makes his decision to give up on revenge feel rushed. Shadow was a compassionate character throughout Sonic Adventure 2, even cracking a smile in several scenes. The movie just focuses on making him an antagonistic force for Sonic to fight against, which leaves out deeper and more intricate elements of his personality. Even the Maria scenes were more interesting in the game because it showed more of why Maria was in the facility or how she befriended Shadow, even showing her promise for Shadow to give the people of Earth a chance to be happy, which caused him to cry and shed a tear at her memory. In comparison, the movie just shows her thinking he's cute and then they do silly stuff together and then she gives him friendly advice and then she dies.
That can't be it. Where's the rest of it?
I wasn't expecting it to be the same as the game, but I was expecting the story to be told more faithfully, and the movie just misses that in several categories. So at this point you're probably coming to the conclusion that I think the movie is mid or average. Then you must have forgotten what I said earlier. The movie is still good in spite of its problems. It continues the story of the first and second movie in a methodical way with all the characters having a practical purpose in the plot, fun banter between the cast, good development for Sonic, and a believable redemption arc for both Shadow and Eggman. There's definitely problems like not committing to Tom dying or that fiasco with Gunn not being fully resolved, but nothing severe to the point of breaking the world or internal logic of the story. I do still wish they put more care into Shadow's character and expanded on him more, like a reference to Black Doom or how he could be a refugee from Sonic's original home planet. I don't know, maybe they're saving that stuff for a future movie. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a fun movie and definitely deserves to make more money than Mufasa at the box office. And hopefully with the right direction they'll be able to pull off something stronger for the fourth movie. Only time will tell, but for now, it seems like things are looking pretty good for the Blue Blur.